What up, everybody? Welcome to the State of Wild, episode 10, a regular podcast, YouTube video, web series thingy. I'm joined by my good friend Corbett. Corbett, how are you doing tonight, friend?
Hey, I'm doing pretty good, Meowth. I'm having a little break from Wild, but at the moment, I'm doing great. Looking forward to getting back into things at the start of next season.
Just mental rehab, mental rehab.
Recharge.
You guys know the drill by now. We're going to be doing three things during this episode. First of all, we're going to be talking about the state of the Wild meta, so what's dominating, how to beat it, and any decks that might be flying underneath the radar. Second half, we're going to be talking about any Wild news, controversial topics, or maybe the lack thereof. And last but not least, we'll be talking about our decks of the week. So a powerful meta deck, one that's being underestimated, and a fun off-meta choice that we've been enjoying. And so before we get started, just a reminder to leave a like, comment, and subscribe if you guys enjoy content like this. So yeah, let's go ahead and get started. All right, so state of the Wild meta. Well, the meta hasn't changed too much in the past week. Still very heavily biased towards Darkglare and Reno Priest. But I think more interestingly, we've been seeing refinement of these lists, right? So we've been seeing a lot of refinement of Darkglare Warlock specifically, and Reno Priest, which is kind of surprising. So let's start talking about Darkglare Warlock, okay? So we've seen some experimentation with a lot of pretty unique cards. Sun Fury, Hooked Reavers, Defiles and Shadow Flames, and Cult Neophyte, I think, are like the five kind of fancy tech cards and major changes that I've been seeing between a lot of lists. So let's just talk about them in general. So what are your thoughts on some of these tech cards? And what are the flex spots, I think? So we've got 28 solid cards, and you're fitting in maybe 2 of these, right? In your list at max?
I'm not even sure if I agree with that, whether it's quite that tight. I think that the list might even have a little bit more flex than that if you want to talk about things like cutting the crystallizer, or the cheaty ankle biters have been cut here and there from different lists. But yeah, Darkglare really, it's very strange actually. For a deck to be this popular and be this good and still have this much influx, right? There are so many options. Yeah, it's not even just the 5 cards that you talked about there. There's other stuff like Spirit Bomb, that Grim Rally, Soulfires is still seeing play. There's still a lot of weird stuff targeted at different matchups. And personally, I've really been liking the cults, which are particularly effective, I think, at higher ranks because they are just good against Priest and they're often good against Odd Warrior and some of the more hard targets that you're seeing. But yeah, there's been a really huge variety of stuff, which has actually been very weird in terms of I said, a top tier list.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so let's kind of talk about that. So you talked about Cult Neophytes being really good against Priest and Odd Warrior. Are there any other tech cards that listeners should be thinking about to tech for Reno Priest and Odd Warrior outside of Cult Neophytes?
Polkit was something that some players tested, but wasn't too successful. The idea being, in theory, you put Lothar to the top of the deck along with Giants, and then if you have Solarium, then you can rip out a turn 6 Lothar, couple Giants. Turns out it was actually a little bit clunky, so that didn't really catch on. Grim Rally, though, is actually something that can be very, very good against Priest. And against some of these slower decks, because it just means that you have a little bit more damage, a little bit more stats. It means that if you play a cult out and then all of a sudden you buff up your things by 1 health, all of a sudden a breath of dragons or whatever it's called, the Priest AoE.
Infinite,
that one. It doesn't clear the board as cleanly. It doesn't clear flame imps. It doesn't clear the cult.
Yeah.
And you can just put on a ton of pressure. So those are the cleanest ones, along with Soulfire is good as well. This is extra reach if your board gets wiped.
Yeah.
But then there's other stuff, right? There's other stuff that you can handle for the mirror for things like Kingsbane, like Sun Fury Protector.
That's where I was going to go next.
It's a lot of directions you can go, for sure.
So I'm assuming Sun Fury and Hooked Reavers seem like they're in there because Kingsbane currently isn't running saps, right? And so, yeah, Kingsbane Rogue will get your face really low, but then you taunt up, right? Plus a Spellstone, you win the game. And then I'm assuming stuff like Defile, Grim Rally, Soulfires. I saw one list running Shadow Flame, which I thought was just not correct, but I'm assuming those are all techs for the mirror, right? If those are super prevalent in High Legend.
Yeah, Shadow Flame is insane in the mirror. I mean, it sucks elsewhere, but it's really if you just want to be targeting the mirror, that's a great way to go. I even saw the other day I queued up and actually ran into another Darkglare running Neruba Weblord. Like
Just
the
strictly
counter,
for
the
the mayor.
counter, yeah, the counter for their own deck, they were including it just to like pop off, play it, and then the opponent just GG'd, peace out.
So all right, so we can't condone the use of Nerebar Weblord in your own Darkglare decks. I am also iffy on the Defiles. I've been really liking the Grim Rallies from what I've been seeing.
Mm-hmm.
Because alongside Grim Rallies and the Broomsticks, if you're going second, it's not nearly as big of a detriment, right? You have the ability to swing it back in your favor, and it's also like going first. It's a great card to like if they don't have Broomstick, you win the game, sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And like you mentioned, it's actually good into Priest. I didn't even think about that, right? Force them to use a Mass Hysteria on something that doesn't include Giants, and then you just pop off the next turn with Giants, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, it like we've been saying, for a deck that's 3 weeks old and is considered by many the best deck in the format, it's really interesting and actually really cool to see the fact that it's still, super in the infancy stage when it comes to refining the deck list, which is kind of cool to see this process happen as we go. And then let's talk about Arena Priest, right? This is a deck that once we established that the Polkelt non-dragon version was kind of the way to go, we saw very little refinement of the deck, right? Other than like Sphere or no Sphere, right? Or Wave of Apathy because Darkglare Warlock is super popular. But we actually saw some major changes, and I think you were probably at the base of this. You and Hijo talked about cutting what was considered by many an auto include in this deck. You want to talk about it?
Yeah, so Mindrender Elucia obviously had an insane impact when it came out. It made Rena Priest incredibly hard to target and to play around, and a huge pain in the butt. Turns out at 3 mana, it feels very clunky. Like this is something that I was trying Rena Priest a couple games here and there. And all of a sudden, I just kept on noticing the Mindrender drifting further and further to the left side of my hand, and it just wasn't doing anything. And then I was like, this actually seems really bad. I mean, it's not really good into Darkglare. It's not particularly good into Kingsbane at all, like especially now that it costs 3. It's not that effective in the mirror because they can dump your hand out and you're at a 3 mana discount basically.
Yeah.
And so yeah, it just felt very clunky. And then like Hijo added me. And it was like, hey, what do you think about like Mindrender? It feels really crap. And I'm like, yeah, I'm definitely with you. And he actually went on and like hit rank 1 legend with a list that omitted it. So it's becoming like a more popular choice to definitely like cut the card. In standard as well, like obviously different formats, but standard has got a thing where like Galakron Priest is really looking to cut it at the moment as well. So it feels like a card that people definitely underestimated the impact that the nerf had. It's still probably an important card if the meta ever gets like particularly hostile and with the certain types of decks. Yeah. But right now it doesn't seem that good.
Yeah, I actually just spent like 5 hours playing nothing but Priest, so I 100% agree with you. Playing it in like top 200 legend, I think it's mainly because of at least how the Americas and the EU server metagame has kind of shaken out, whatever the word is. Where it's like Darkglare Warlock and Arena Priest and like Kingsbane are like, I don't even think this is an exaggeration to say, but it's like 3/4 of the metagame are those 3 decks.
Yeah.
And Elucia, like you said, is garbage into those 3 decks. And so that's definitely something that I can, like, I'm okay with cutting it, which is something that I would, kind of dismiss myself for saying 3 weeks ago. But I think combination with the nerf and how the meta has shapen up, it's definitely a card worth cutting. It's really interesting. The like Quest Mage just completely just disappeared, right?
Yeah.
Which for me, part of me is like super okay with it, right? Because I hate Quest Mage, but also that's like how hostile the meta's gotten, right? It's super aggro heavy, super combo heavy, and then Rena Priest, which now has like the best way to disrupt Quest Mage, right? If they so want it, but now that Quest Mage is kind of off the map, you don't need it, right? Which is insane, absolutely insane. But yeah, Arena Priest still being refined, guys. Don't just mindlessly net deck a list and play it for months and months. Think about the cards that are in your list and whether they actually belong or not, right? But yeah, we talked about Arena Priest and Darkglare. I think anybody listening alongside me and Corbett will agree that these decks are both stupid strong right now, right? And while we might not get nerfs for a while, and we haven't heard whether they're looking at it or not, the Chinese Hearthstone community has released 2 wild reports this week via Soda. If you guys don't know Soda on Twitter, they are great, right? Make sure you're following them because them and Glore Magic are like great insights into the Chinese metagame, something that we don't normally have easy access to. So when it comes to these Chinese meta reports, so while I'm not super high on some of the lists that come out from these meta reports, they're usually like super janky, running like 12 1-0s. The big kind of benefit to these is these meta reports and their server in general are usually much quicker at picking up trends when it comes to power of decks or new decks, performance in the metagame, right? So for example, they predicted the dominance of Darkglare Warlock long before it became super popular on our servers. Kind of two big things. We're not actually seeing any dramatic shifts. No brand new tier 1 deck that's popping up to counter Darkglare Warlock and Reno Priest, which is a little bit scary. And while we haven't seen any like hard counters, what we've seen is like this rise of a deck that has really solid matchups into both of them, which is Odd Warrior. Not Dead Man's Hand Warrior. We're talking about Odd Warrior. And we'll talk about Dead Man's Hand Warrior in a little bit, but let's talk about this Odd Warrior matchup into Darkglare. Darkglare Pain Zoo. I actually think this is a very strong matchup for the Odd Warrior. Do you want to talk a little bit about it from like the Odd Warrior perspective and what makes it so strong?
Yeah, Odd Warrior definitely has like the ability to withstand that first wave, even alongside a Lothab. Being able to get up to, like 40, 50 health pretty quickly. And then it has like really clean removal with Reckless Flurry, Brawl, with Barrow paired with something like Sword and Board. So it's really able to like deal with that first wave and just like deplete the Warlock of threats. Now, sometimes there are definitely games where your opponent will like cult and you can't do anything, and then the next turn they Lothab and you still can't do anything, and it's like, well, crap. But I think like on average, it's a very good matchup. Well, I don't know. Very good is maybe a slight stretch, but I think it's favored pretty firmly for the Warrior. And it feels like among the viable decks in the meta, Odd Warrior is the like best and dare I say only like really solid bet into beating Darkglare. And it's something that I've actually been playing when I've been picking up the game here and there over the past like week or so.
Yeah, I'm not excited to see Odd Warrior back in the metagame, but it's for a good cause, so I think I can deal with it, right? I would agree with you. I think Odd Warrior is probably the only favored matchup into Darkglare Warlock that's not auto-losing to everything else in the metagame, so I agree with that. Mm-hmm. And while I think Reno Priest is like close to 50-50 against Darkglare, like having a deck that has actual favorable matchups into Darkglare Warlock is super exciting to see. But let's talk about the other side of the coin, Reno Priest, right? And so assuming the Reno Priest is not running Plate Breaker, right? Generally, you can get through the insane amounts of armor if you have, Raws on Anduin at a respectable time, right, in the game. Mm-hmm. And so for those of you guys that don't really know how this matchup plays out, normally how this matchup ends up is you draw a bunch of cards, and then what you're going to do is you spawn a Shadows. And essentially with Spawn of Shadows and a Seance on the Spawn of Shadows, and you'll use some resources, and basically that first wave is going to get rid of all their armor. And then you Reno the following turn, and then with your second Spawn of Shadows, you kill them from like 40 HP, right? That's generally how the matchup plays out. You were talking about how you've actually been okay in that matchup.
Yeah.
We'll talk about your specific list in part 3, but you actually are running...
Stay tuned.
Yeah. You're actually running some insane amounts of armor gain from kind of unseen sources, right? But other than just like tanking up and praying, what else can Odd Warriors do, for those that are listening, to improve their matchups into Reno Priest?
Obviously, I just want to like minimize chip damage. We'll get into the list specifically a little bit later on. But as long as you minimize the chip damage and try and maximize what you can get out of the cold lights in terms of like milling, there are a lot of really good mill targets in that matchup, whether it be the Seance itself, whether it be the Spawn, obviously Braza and Anduin are pretty, it goes without saying. But there's a lot of ways that you can kind of like chip away the maximum potential damage that they can do. And if you just if you just deny minion damage at all, and you just clean up the Lothab, or you clean up the Raza with Dynamatics and Blade Storms and things like that, you can generally, I think, get to a pretty decent life total where you feel pretty comfortable. It's not a matchup where I felt fine like when I was playing the deck into Reno Priest. I won more than I lost pretty comfortably. Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see like what happens in a wider scope if people begin to tech and play more Odd Warrior.
Yeah, I wonder how much of that is because people, might not be doing this spawn seance line.
Misplaying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I also think that like you mentioned, I think small cards like Shadow Visions Mills or Renew Mills are actually huge because those are a ton of resources that are being taken away from the Spawn of Shadows plays, right? So, um, but yeah, I didn't have very many issues against Odd Warrior unless like I made a very like dumb mistake. But also part of it comes down to like Death Lord and Coalite Mills. But yeah, so like we're talking about Odd Warrior actually looking like it's potentially the one shining light in the meta right now, our one potential savior. And I know we're gonna get a lot of questions about this. Dead Man's Hand Warrior, right? They both play sort of, I say sort of, the same role in the metagame as this like control warrior archetype. So why is Odd Warrior kind of the shining light and not Dead Man's Hand? And I know the answer to this, but I kind of want to let you. I think I know the answer to this at least. But what is your reasoning?
I think that like Dead Man's Hand is a deck that it's easy to have games where it feels like you're doing very, very powerful things that the like Darkglare can't stop, whether it be like Risk Skipper, Smith, Clear, and they just couldn't kill it, and then you have Barrow and stuff like that. So I think it's a deck that it definitely feels like you can do a lot, but I don't think it does that very well consistently. So I don't think it's as good into Warlock as the Odd Warrior at all. It's a lot more complicated to draw like Skipper, this, that, versus just like Survive and then Brawl, or like Survive then Flurry. Like that's a lot simpler. And I think like it's a lot worse in the Priest matchup as well, because you don't have quite as much armor gain. What were you thinking?
Well, I was going to say consistency is the big thing, right? We're like, Dead Man's Hand God draws are God draws, right? And I think the big thing is you're trying to tackle these two big decks, Darkglare Warlock and Arena Priest. And while Odd Warrior, like while Dead Man's Hand might be like more well-rounded and can beat everything in the metagame, potentially, I think Odd Warrior, while more polarized in its matchup spread, is good into the two decks that it needs to be good against, and it's consistently good, right?
Yeah, Dead Man's Hand definitely feels much more dependent on the Barrow, which is again like a one of. It feels much more like did they draw or did they not? Whereas Odd Warrior feels like there's a lot more potential counterplay for the Warrior.
You have more than one answer as the Odd Warrior into the Darkglare Warlock, right? Which I think is the big thing. But yeah, consistency key, I think, when it comes to Odd Warrior. But yeah, that's the wild metagame. Maybe not the drastic changes that many might have been hoping for. But yeah, I'm really interested to see how Odd Warrior kind of plays out in this metagame, because I also feel like we haven't talked too much about Kingsbane Rig, but I think Kingsbane maybe undisputed third best deck in the format. We haven't really talked about this, but I personally think Kingsbane's the third best deck, and Odd Warrior kind of wrecks Kingsbane Rig as well. So I feel like it actually has a lot of potential in the metagame, and I'm kind of excited to see how the metagame plays out a little bit and see if it actually makes a change as people pick up the deck.
I wouldn't go as far as say I'm excited. I think I'm a little bit more in the bandwagon of
I still want nerfs, right? Don't get me wrong, I still want nerfs, but I'm excited to see like how the meta adapts, right? Like how the builds change.
That's definitely always
the
interesting.
Frequency adapts,
regardless.
Yeah, we'll talk about that. But yeah, so that's it for our wild meta game. Let's move on to part 2. All right, so part 2, wild news. Let's tackle some drama. Let's sit down and talk, okay? People gave me a lot of shit recently talking about how I think Darkglare Warlock is okay. And that's because last week on our podcast, I said I think the deck is strong and I wouldn't be against a nerf. Okay, I said this part. People just kind of chose to ignore it. And I thought Arena Priest is better, but I think that at the time of our recording, it had only been 10 days of Darkglare Warlock being a deck, okay? And I just didn't want to be hasty with nerfs because that sets a terrible precedent when it comes to wild specifically, okay? And so people kind of just took this whole first part and ignored it, where I talked about, I think the deck is strong, and then they kind of took my, hey, don't be hasty with nerfing a deck as me kind of defending the deck. And like I said, I just didn't want to be hasty. I didn't want to nerf a deck after 10 days because that's a terrible precedent, right? As time has gone on, we've seen that there isn't really a consistent counter that exists in the current metagame. And a large part of that is due to the existence of actually Arena Priest, not Darkglare Warlock. But I just wanted to bring this up because if you're going to give me crap about a comment I make, at least like include the context, don't just clip a part out for whatever fits your narrative. But yeah, I just wanted to kind of take a moment and address that.
Yes. As the Darkglare defender, Mia, hypothetically, like, what changes would you like to see for your favorite deck in the meta? Do you want to jump into that stuff?
Sure. I mean, look, we're gonna do you guys a favor, right? I'm gonna do you a favor. I talked about nerfs 2 weeks ago, and then we immediately got a nerf, right? So you guys can go ahead and thank me in the comments below. I think my big thing for Darkglare is, I think Darkglare is kind of dumb, right? The refreshing of 2 mana combined with the 1 mana deal damage allows you to just generate insane amounts of, some insane turns, right? Being able to cheat insane amount of stats and draw through your deck. And I think if we just nerf Darkglare, it's a very simple change. Just nerf Darkglare to 1 mana. And if you do that, you don't have to touch Raise Dead. Raise Dead and Flesh Giant can still exist in Wild and in Standard, and it can still be powerful in both formats. But nerfing Darkglare to 1 mana, I think the problem that a lot of people have with the deck is the insane amounts of mana cheat in 1 turn, right? And it's just because people have this like really terrible reaction to losing to 2 giants on turn 3, right? And I recognize that and I sympathize. Like, I also hate losing to 2 giants on turn 3. And so if Darkglare gets nerfed to only being able to refresh 1 mana, those situations aren't going to happen because you're not able to generate as much mana, right? You're only kind of refreshing 1 mana crystal at a time. You're not generating any mana. So those pop-off turns should be kind of non-existent, or at least a hell of a lot less likely to happen. And so that hopefully still kind of lets the deck be a thing. I don't know if it'll exist without the insane kind of pop-off turns, but it'll at least tone it down a significant amount.
Yeah, it would just take away things like being able to play a Solarium on the same turn as Darkglare, because it means that things like Penflinger and Flame Imp and Librarian, they aren't generating mana. Like, if you have 1 mana left, you play it, you have 1 mana still. You can't just like keep looping things like Penflinger, which lets you keep popping off. So yeah, this is the change that I would definitely like to see. I've seen some people mention that they could send it to 4 mana. And well, I think like
you're just pushing the combo turn 1 turn later, and you guys are still going to complain about it, right?
I understand. Yeah, the logic, I guess, is like it gives you more time to like deplete their health and stuff and put more pressure on. But I feel like it's similar to sort of a Quest Mage nerf where it doesn't really change the play experience that much. And so like even if the deck would be weaker, in the same way that Quest Mage was definitely weaker when it went from 6 to 8, it doesn't really change how people feel about it and like the types of swing turns that can happen.
Yeah.
And so I think like that would be the better change.
Yeah, and the way that you're losing to the deck is going to be the same, right? So that feeling is not going anywhere. But yeah, I don't know. I will say though, like, since we're on the topic of talking about nerfs to Darkglare Warlock, so while there hasn't been any confirmation that they're looking at anything from Team 5, I will say I don't think that you can go anywhere near touching Darkglare Warlock without also touching Reno Priest. I mean, my personal opinion is that Reno, like, as good as Darkglare Warlock is, okay, I think Reno Priest is still the best deck in the format. And to me, what that means is that Reno Priest is just as high of a win rate, and it's maybe more meta defining and meta warping than Darkglare Warlock is. And what I mean by that is there are decks out there that can counter Darkglare Warlock, right? Like decks that have a ton of direct burn. So stuff like Secret Mage, Kingsbane Rogue's been popping up. I've seen an Aggro Shaman as well. Those decks exist, right? And so you have potential quote unquote counters to Darkglare Warlock, but you don't ever see them on ladder because they have a 0% win rate into Reno Priest, right? Whereas there are a lot less ways to consistently beat Reno Priest. And so if you touch Darkglare Warlock without touching Reno Priest, it's going to be like 50% Reno Priest. Or we're going to hop immediately back to this Reno Priest, Quest Mage, aggro, rock, paper, scissors that we had last expansion that nobody enjoyed anyways. And so I think if you touch Darkglare Warlock, which I think you have to, you absolutely have to touch Reno Priest. And I think the easiest way to do that is to just revert Raza back to 1 mana. Okay, Raza at 1 mana, that deck was still really good. Okay, that deck was still a solid tier 2 deck as a control deck to beat aggro with a potential spawn combo to finish off stuff like Warlock. All right, you're not breaking the deck, you're not nerfing it to the ground, you're nerfing it back to a fine state. And I will never understand why they reverted it back to 0 mana. I know they said people enjoyed playing the deck, but that deck is just absolutely broken with Raza at 0 mana. And I just, like, if they touch Darkglare without touching Rena Priest, I'm gonna be pissed.
Yeah, I think like they're definitely I'm definitely like totally with you on the Rena Priest would need to get changed. I think we have like I'd push back a little bit on the Darkglare counters and like which deck is necessarily warping. But I definitely agree. Like I said, those two are very, very good, and I would like to see that Raza change. That's it. I think I'm really happy that they're willing to make reverse. When it pops up, it's just like I hope that again, like what they did with buffs, right? Like buffs and standard is something that I'm happy to see, but just like they changed Galaxy back, I would be very, very much like I would be happy if they were willing to make like changes when they felt necessary. If they felt like they made a mistake, just go back on it, like, and don't be discouraged about buffing cards in the future or making reverts in the future.
Absolutely, 100% agree. I love the fact that they buffed cards and they changed cards when they rotated. I absolutely love that, and I don't want my like complaining about Raza to come off like, hey, don't ever buff cards. Like that's the absolute opposite. I loved all of the changes that they made except for this one, right? And I think part of that might have just been like the meta that we're in did not need a Raza revert, right? It just absolutely didn't. And so, yeah, I think what they're doing in terms of Wild when it comes to more frequent changes, right? When it comes to nerfs and buffs, I think is awesome. I absolutely love it. Big thumbs up for me too. Yeah. I just this one change I'm not a fan of, and I kind of let's go back. We kind of glossed over this, but maybe just to like wrap up this section. Right. Like what to you defines what the best deck in the format is, right? And this is going to change between me and you. We're probably going to differ on this opinion, and we're probably going to differ from a lot of the people listening. But yeah, like for me, that definition of the best deck is for me a combination of like win rate and presence on ladder, and then also like meta defining, meta warping, right? And for me, part of that comes from like we talked about Giants Warlock being like one of the most dominant decks, right, at its time. But the stats, right? I say stats in quotations because the resources that we have for stats, at least, right, via VS and HS Replay, showed that it wasn't the best deck. But part of that was because literally the entire metagame was geared towards beating it, right? And so for me, that's meta defining, right? That the entire meta is wrapped around Reno Priest, right? And to a lesser extent, Darkglare Warlock. And because for me, that means, well, they can't counter Darkglare Warlock as effectively because there's the existence of Reno Priest. So I'd like to get your opinion on that for sure.
Yeah, when I find like best, I'm almost always talking about like this win rate. And that's just because win rate is something that is, objective. Like it's something that's
fair. Yeah.
I guess like it's something that I can actually point to.
There's very little bias in that, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's not really about my own personal opinion or like something that's sort of more abstract, such as influence.
Yeah.
So that's always what I'm talking about. But again, like I will have different conversations where I can talk about like the deck that is the most warping or a change that I would make, even though a deck might not be the quote unquote best to me. Yeah. And yeah, that's just how I always see it.
Okay, so what you're saying is your best deck in the format right now is Darkglare Warlock.
I think the best deck is Darkglare Warlock, and I think the most warping is probably Darkglare Warlock. And I think Reno Priest is very, very good and is in a similar state. But I think Darkglare Warlock is probably both those things and the most popular.
Maybe I'm just a little bit biased, being a Warlock player and all. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this conversation. Not very much news, but still I think a very good discussion that we wanted to have, right? But yeah, let's go ahead and move on to part 3. All right, so part 3, here's where we talk about our decks of the week. So today we've got a meta deck. We kind of spoiled it in part 1. We'll be talking about. But then we also have 2 off-meta choices to present to you again today. So yeah, Corbett, you want to go ahead and take it away with our meta deck of the week?
And we touched on it earlier. Here's Odd Warrior. So this list comes from Hijo. Basically, like this list is packing in as much armor as you can. With things like Ironhide. I know that's probably the first thing that stands out. People think Ironhide is trash. No, Ironhide's actually pretty good in this deck. Ironhide is a card that I actually saw Frobro play a while back, like several expansions ago. And I kept an eye out on it because I remember looking at the stats on Ironhide, and they're actually pretty good. And that was surprising to me because to me the card was kind of a meme.
When you say stats,
no, it's actually
it's this
like drawn win rate.
Okay.
Yeah, drawn win rate stats and stuff like that. It actually looked like it was pretty decent. And in this meta specifically, I actually really like it. Whether it's used to pair with like Reckless Flurry if you like only have 4 mana or something, or whether it's just like use every armor card that you have available to kind of like either slow down the Darkglare Warlock and survive, or even slow down the Reno Priest and try and out armor their damage. It's just like a good card, and I think like you can see a lot of similar things here where we're running Bash, Sword and Board, this Coerce, Bladestorm. It's very like removal heavy. It's very armor heavy. And yeah, I think it lines up really cleanly into the metagame, and he's definitely a deck that I'm going to be playing. I think like we are talking about earlier, like what is the 3rd best deck? You said Kingsbane. I think Odd Warrior might actually be like one of the best decks in the format. I think Odd Warrior, particularly at high ranks, I think it lines up really, really, really well in the meta. It's kind of like my sleeper right now. I don't know if it is, but it's in that kind of conversation for me for sure.
Yeah. I think like you said, I'm done with this list. It's like it's literally like an aggressive, maybe not anti-aggressive. It's very anti-Darkglare, very anti-Reno Priest.
It's anti-meta. Yeah.
I will say I ran into, I think it was Bat earlier today, who was playing pretty much this exact same list, but instead of Ironhides was running Broomsticks. So that way you could bypass the Loatheb and Cult Neophyte lockouts from a Darkglare Warlock with Lord Barov, which is interesting.
It's interesting.
Yeah. I'm not too sure like what his opinions are on the card, because I'm sure he was just testing it, but it was in top 100 Legend, so I'm assuming it was going well for him. But maybe just another card to keep an eye on. I both Ironhides and Broomsticks kind of feel weird to me, but I also play 0 Odd Warriors, so my opinions on this are mute. But yeah.
Yeah, and if you want to tech even further against Darkglare, you can try Bulwark, the legendary weapon.
The weapon.
Yeah. Personally, I tried it and I didn't actually like it very much. But I know it's something that other people have been trying, so I figured I'd throw it out there as another option for people.
Yep. All right. Let's move on to our next deck. It's an off-meta, kind of anti-meta deck as well. We've got another Bomb Warrior list for you. So the idea behind this is the exact same, right? It's a very anti-meta list. This was used by Jonah to hit top 25 Legend on NA. But the idea is you have the Risky Skipper, Barov shenanigans, right, to beat Darkglare Warlock. But instead of just trying to out-armor the Reno Priest damage, what you do is you shuffle in bombs, right? Like typical Bomb Warriors do, which messes with Polkelt and it turns off the Raza and the Singleton cards, right? And then you have the obscene amounts of armor gain that you can do with Risky Skipper Armorsmith turns. So yeah, it's very similar in style, right? Not style, but game plan, I think, right? Very anti-Reno Priest, very anti Darkglare Warlock, but I mean, other than that, it looks like a very normal list that's just kind of found space for Barov, right, as the way to beat the Darkglare Warlocks.
Yeah, Bomb Warrior and Dead Man's Hand are always like sort of cousins to me. They run like almost the exact same shell.
It's like one Druid, of them, right? Where you run like 25 of the same 30 cards. Yeah,
exactly. Where this one of them plans to win by just never running out of cards, and the other one plans to win by putting like 50 damage in the opponent's deck. But it's very similar. And it is interesting to me on the whole that Warrior has become like the savior, whether it's like DMH
who would have
or
thought?
Bomb
Who would have thought?
or Odd. Yeah, it's like, and I think like it all kind of just revolves around Barov. It's like the one card that's really pushing this.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's been really interesting to me that Warriors popped up as this off-meta darling.
Yeah, I don't know. I just recently this week, not to sell it too hard, but I put out like a crafting guide for Skullman's Academy, and I think like the biggest surprise for a lot of people was like Lord Barov being a should craft card, right? Because I think a lot of like hype around this card was like, yeah, it's a fine card for like Enraged Warriors, right? If they really want it, like when people were like looking at it when it was like revealed, but like it's like bonkers good, right? I think it's a lot better than even I was expecting it. But then the fact that it also lines up super insanely well with the current metagame, I think is like the big, like this Risky Skipper, Ankar, Barov package is just kind of like nutty. It's just so good. And so now let's move on to our last deck of the week. you can tell that there's not too much experimentation going on with the last week of the metagame, or the last week of the month rather. But I have been jamming so many games of LPG Mage. It's currently my favorite deck on ladder, and so I kind of just wanted to, if you guys are okay with it, and I hope you are because I'm already doing it. I want to talk about kind of my updated version of LPG Mage. I've kind of just ditched the high roll potential of Solia and stuff and just gone for solid good cards that are good in multiple matchups. And so over 70 games, I just kind of want to give you my stats because this is my deck and I have to defend myself. I have about a 64% win rate, which I think is like not too shabby, right? Even if it is like rank 300, 400 legend, 64% win rate with any deck is pretty good. I have a 65% win rate against Priest, and I'm holding my own above 50% win rate against Darkglare Warlock. And so I know when you tried to build this deck, you kind of like took out like 15 out of the 30 cards. But I'm a really big fan of this shell currently. I think the only cards that I'm iffy on are the Jandis. Like that's the one card I'm like kind of iffy on. But yeah, like against Rena Priest, you do Loatheb loops or Cloud Prince burst damage, and you have Ice Block as well. And then against Darkglare Warlock, you kind of just try to stall them out of the game, right? You have Rena the Relicologist with Brand potentially. You have Mind Control Tech Broomstick. Once they pop off on turn 3, turn 4, like steal a giant and then swing the board back with Broomstick. It's kind of like the main way in combination with like Frost Nova Doomsayer. So not super consistent against Darkglare Warlock, but somehow I have above a 50% win rate. I don't know. Maybe that's just an artifact of my ranks, but
have you thought about Jaina? Because that's a card that's definitely like fallen out of the meta. So I'd like to hear like your own thoughts on how it's been listed.
My logic behind Jaina is so against Priest, the way that I've like lost games to Priest is like them getting in a crap ton of chip damage and being able to pop my block without using spawn. And so what Jaina does is it just completely nullifies that opportunity, right? So even if they have Zeph for the block, they're having to burst you from 35, right? Which kind of gets difficult when you're like buying that time to loop with Loatheb or Cloud Prince. So that's part of the logic, but also like literally every card in this deck outside of Tiamat and like Jandis is like anti-aggro, right? And so what I've had to do is I have no finisher kind of for the deck, right? So against stuff like Kingsbane and Pirate Warrior and Darkglare Warlock, like I don't have a way to like seal the game, say okay, GG, game's over. And so Jaina just kind of, if I get the opportunity to get to 8 or 9 mana, it just kind of ends the game. And it's really nice with stuff like Tiamat and Cloud Prince with like just insane amounts of burst healing if that's needed, right? Because Cloud Prince is an elemental. So like I don't think it's the best card, and I don't think it's like a must include style of card, but it's been really, really good for me. And I've completely ditched Amazing Arena because Q Block doesn't exist. So but yeah, this is like right now, this is my favorite deck, so I love talking about it. So yeah, guys, that's it. Just a reminder that we're going to be doing episodes like this every Sunday with news and decks every week. And just a reminder that we're on Spotify now as well. So if you'd like to listen while you're on the go, make sure you guys check that out and share it with your friends. Corbett, thank you again for joining me this week. Let the people know where they can find you.
Guys, you can find me at CorbettGames. So that's on Twitter, Twitch, YouTube, all that good stuff, CorbettGames. Tune in. I will be back streaming within a couple days after my little absence for the past couple.
Yeah, so make sure you guys follow them. Definitely well worth it. We appreciate you guys watching. Hope you all enjoyed. Stay safe out there, and we'll see you guys next time. Later.
Bye.